Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Melissa Swee, and I am the Action for Early Learning Outreach Manager at People's Emergency Center. I'll be joined today by my colleague, Zoe Buckwalter, and we're bringing you big feelings, little feelings, and kindergarten readiness. Our goals for today are to really underscore the importance of the parent-child relationship and emotional awareness and the ability to manage our own emotions. Why are we talking about this when it comes to kindergarten? Because these are the most important skills for children to have as they move into the school environment. Let's talk a little bit about our topics for today. We're going to start with attachment and emotional regulation. We'll move into the impact of transitions on young children and the concepts of autonomy and choice. And then finally, we'll wrap it up by bringing it back to kindergarten readiness and talking about why these skills are so important for the kindergarten classroom. Okay, let's get started.
Hi everyone, I'm Zoe. I'm the Family Engagement Specialist with Action for Early Learning at People's Emergency Center, and I'm going to talk to you about attachment. So I'm going to pull up my content, and we're going to take a look at this video to get us started.
Please take a moment here to pause this presentation and go to the YouTube site you see on your screen. You'll find a short video on what's called the still face experiment. After you watch that, you can return to the presentation.
So as you can see here, how you interact with children has a huge impact on their sense of security, their ability to form relationships, their ability to feel safe in the world, to understand what's going on, and to feel like they're being cared for. So when we think about causes of secure attachment, you can see when the mother was positively interacting with her child and she was smiling and laughing, the child felt safe and secure. If, for example, you have a situation where a family is living in poverty and a parent is not home that often, or when they are coming home, they're very stressed out, or, they're on their phone, they're working from home, and they can't really interact with the child and have those warm interactions, that can be really slowly create this non-secure attachment style. And then, of course, if the child is in an abusive situation, that's also going to create a non-secure attachment style. So I'm just going to pull up this graphic so you can see here different examples of secure attachment, and then these are all examples of insecure attachment. So ambivalent, disordered, and avoidant. In a secure attachment, you'll see a child greet adults with positive emotions, be happy to see them. In ambivalent attachment styles, they're going to be very wary of strangers and untrustworthy. In an avoidant attachment style, they may avoid their parents, avoid people who they're supposed to feel safe with. And then in disordered attachment, there's confusion or apprehension. What this might look like is if a child is really excited to see their parents, but then very quickly gets very angry at them also, and really goes back and forth between that push and pull dynamic. So I'm just going to zoom out. So as educators and caregivers, we want to make sure that we're equipped with strategies that support a variety of attachment styles. We know we can't control the circumstances that children come from and not what we're dealing with in the classroom. And so we want to make sure that we are implementing strategies that help children develop secure attachment as much as possible. And so part of this is working with families and working with whatever children are going home to outside of our classroom. But also in our classroom, we want to make sure that we're having intentional, warm interactions and that we're helping children learn coping strategies for when they are feeling insecure and unsure how to behave in relationships with others. Because if they have an insecure attachment style with their caregiver, that's going to translate to their friendships and relationships in school with authority figures and then throughout life.
Okay, but what is regulation and self-regulation? Let's talk about emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is defined as being able to emotionally experience and respond to daily occurrences in a way that's tolerable and socially acceptable, as opposed to under or overreacting. I want to talk about the concept of scaffolding for a little bit. If you look at this photo here, You can see scaffolding on the side of a building that's being built. The purpose of scaffolding is to support the building until it's strong enough to stand on its own. And once the building is strong enough, the scaffolding is taken away and it stands independently. This is the same concept of scaffolding in early childhood, where when the child is learning a new skill, we give support where it's needed, and we're continuously reflecting on where the child's skill set is at, and then pulling back when we can so that they can develop more and more independence. And eventually, as they gain mastery over the skill, we pull back completely and they can perform it on their own. How do we actually do this? How do we build emotional regulation in little people? And then pulling away support. So modeling is more about making your own experience around emotional regulation and coping skills obvious to your child. So name your emotions, don't hide them. Show them the way you use coping skills, particularly to come out of difficult emotions. If you feel stressed, demonstrate how you tune into that stress, where you feel it in your body, and then what coping skills you use to shift yourself from feeling stressed to feeling less stressed. So maybe you're someone who takes deep breaths. Maybe you're someone who goes for a walk. Maybe you leave the room and spend some time by yourself so that you can return in a calmer state. Make these coping strategies obvious to your children. Model the behavior of taking your state of being and shifting it to a more appropriate state of being. Another thing you can do is ask questions and give clues. So when your child is experiencing an emotion, whether it's positive or negative, ask them questions. Reflect what you're seeing. If their face gets red when they're angry, tell them, I can tell you're angry because your face gets red, or you're stomping your feet. You seem really frustrated. You're not only giving them the vocabulary to name their emotions, but you're starting to teach them to tune in to what's happening to their bodies. And our bodies give us many clues as to how we feel. It's just a matter of really tuning in and being able to interpret them. And then again, this third bullet point is really about scaffolding, pulling away support as the child gains mastery over their new skill. One of the tools that you can use to build this emotional language and to build the ability to manage emotions and behavior in children is a regulation spectrum. There are many of these online, so if you don't like this one, you can Google regulation spectrum and you can find many. This one is based on the characters of Inside Out. Most regulation spectrums talk about zones. So there's the blue, the green, the yellow, and the red. One of the important messages about feelings that we want to get to children is all feelings are good and all feelings can change. Now, not all feelings feel good, but all feelings are good because they are clues to what's going on in our brain and our body. We want to teach children this because we don't want them to hide their feelings. We also don't want them to feel like we prefer certain feelings over others. We may prefer certain behaviors over others, but feelings are all good and all acceptable. And all feelings can change, and we can be agents of change. We can help children understand that they can move from one feeling into another feeling, that they have control to some extent over how they feel. In the beginning, with children when they're very young, we are doing something called co-regulation, where through the way we deal with emotions, we are helping them regulate or not regulate. And this is where it's really important to reflect on our own reactions to things and the things we're modeling for our children. So let's pull this up a little bit more. So if you look at these zones, you can see each zone has several different emotions contained within it. If you take a closer look at the green zone, you'll see at the bottom it says ready to learn. The green zone is generally the best place for children to be when they're in a school environment. They're usually able to focus on the information that's being provided and also able to participate when they're in the green zone. You can see as we work out to the edges, it gets a little more challenging. In the yellow zone, you might see wiggly behavior. You might see children who are overexcited. In the red zone, that's really where we're talking about our out of control behaviors, where it's almost impossible to learn. And then the blue zone too is important to think about, because often when we think about children who are unregulated, we think about the child who is hitting, biting, running around the room. But the blue zone also represents an unregulated or dysregulated child. So if you think of a student in a classroom with their head resting on their hand, looking very bored, looking very tired, maybe they're falling asleep, this is also not the best state for them to be in for learning, because we need to be at a certain state of alertness in order to learn. So the way you can use these regulation zones with a child is to start making them familiar with the colors and with the feelings that fall within the colors. And you can use emotional vocabulary to name feelings that you observe in them, name feelings you observe in yourself. And you can start to experiment with moving from one zone of regulation to another. So maybe you observe your child in the yellow zone. They're getting frustrated. They seem anxious. And so together, you try a coping skill and then see if we move into the green zone. And if it doesn't work, maybe you try a different coping strategy and try to move closer to the green zone. And again, one of the most important messages here are that all feelings are acceptable and that all feelings can change.
So now we're going to talk about autonomy and choice. So autonomy and choice is really important for kids. We want to make sure that we're respecting the whole child and treating them as another human. We don't want them, just because they're our children and we need to keep them safe and set safe boundaries for them. We also don't want them to feel like, they're just at our will and have no control over their lives. We want them to feel empowered and learn to be confident. And so when we think about the definition of autonomy and choice, when we're thinking about early childhood education, the definition that I'm using is giving children opportunities to make choices and decisions over their own lives in order to empower them and support their developing individuality. And so one thing that's really helpful context to think about is that 90% of brain development happens prior to age 5, 85% happens prior to age 3. So part of supporting this development is improving executive functioning skills in the front of the brain. And what this means is that, children are moving from literally being infants and babies who are completely reliant on other human beings to feed them, to take care of them, to help them fall asleep, to now being individuals who are developing this part of their brain where they're learning how to make choices and how to make responsible choices, socially acceptable choices that are going to help them build relationships and help them throughout their lives. And so we want to be able to support and guide them in this development. And so when we think about what is age appropriate autonomy and why this matters, so when I say autonomy and choice for a young child, of course, we're not going to give them the option of whether they're going to go to bed on time or whether they're going to go to school or whether they're going to look before they cross the street. Those are all things that we have to provide for them as requirements because we're the adults and we need them to know that while they have a lot of autonomy and choice, we want them to know that they're safe with us and that we're helping them, helping guide them in identifying age appropriate choices that they can make. This does not mean that, we can never set boundaries and rules for our children to keep them safe, but it does mean that we are giving age appropriate options. And so, for example, if you're going, from downstairs to the bedroom because it's time to go to sleep, you might say, do you want to hop or do you want to fly or do you want to walk? Just any basic thing like that. And here I have just a visual of a morning routine schedule And you can fill in the person's name. You can put different stickers or check marks after each one. That you can have them help identify what award they want to receive after they've completed these things. And that way you're making a compromise with them when you do these things that I need you to do to be safe, and so that you are prepared to go to school and go out in the world and be confident on your own. Then you can receive something of your choice also. And they can choose, how they're going to get it done, what sticker they're going to put here, whatever opportunities you can create for them within this framework and within what they need to do. That is ideal. So this is just also some specific examples. So giving options, defining who has autonomy over, defining who has autonomy over what role, over what. And so we want kids to know, what is their choice, and then what is the caregiver's choice. And that goes into the role of the caregiver and explaining why some things are non-negotiable. So when I set a rule for a child, I'm not just setting it with no explanation. I'm telling them, this is the rule because I need you to be safe. I want you to cross the street safely. I need you to get to school. You're going to go to school one day, and you're going to need to be confident and prepared for that. And these are the skills you're going to need to know. That's why I'm having you practice this now. So that they don't feel like something is happening to them. They feel like they're part of and understand why we're doing something together. And then giving voice and reflecting back their feelings. So sometimes, obviously, kids are not going to want to do what we're asking them to do. And while we are going to give them as many options as possible, they might still be upset. And so the best thing we can do is reflect back what we notice that they're feeling and name their emotions. Let them know that, even though this isn't a choice, I see you, I feel you, I understand you. And I get that this is something you don't want to do, and that's okay. So that, they don't feel like they're going through an experience on their own. All right.
So we're going to spend some time talking about what we call transitions. Transitions is simply a big word for changes. And sometimes we think about transitions in early education in terms of changes that happen in the classroom. So maybe a child has to move from recess time or play time to work time. Or maybe they need to move from a center in the classroom over to circle time on the rug. But there are also transitions happening in our real life, in the real world, that it's important to pay attention to. The reason that we focus on transitions in early childhood is, like we talked about earlier, the early brain really depends on structure and consistency and predictability in order to feel safe. So when an avalanche of transitions happens, a child can feel overwhelmed pretty easily, which just means the parent or caregiver might need to step up their support to help the child return to feeling regulated. Transitions. So the past 15 months have been very challenging, and they've included a ton of transitions that we've all had to work our way through. Many of these were out of control for us, and almost all of them were out of control for children. And this can be very unsettling to a child. One of the things that early educators are thinking about a lot is the impact of mask wearing on children. It's not only a physical transition because they had to wear something on their face that they weren't used to. It's also a social emotional transition where little human beings who are still learning how to interpret things like tone of voice, expression, language, we're now having to communicate without seeing other people's whole faces. So it's not a small thing. It's actually a very big thing. Some other potential transitions. We've had to isolate to stop the spread of COVID, which means we've had to develop new ways of communicating with people we're used to seeing on a regular basis. This is a huge transition for a child who is used to being in body with the people they care about. School's been canceled. And when we went back to virtual school, then children were challenged to adapt to a whole new way of interacting with their peers and their teachers and with technology. Coronavirus mandates. So this changed so much of how we interact with each other, and children experienced this too. We were asked to social distance and quarantine, stay in our homes. We had to wash our hands much more. We had to pay very close attention to cleaning and increase the amount of time we spent cleaning. And we just had to be much more careful and thoughtful about our interactions. These changes are major, and children experience them as well. Finally, it is very likely that throughout the COVID-19 quarantine that you experienced stress. Most people in the world experience stress during this time. Many of the ways that we are accustomed to coping with life were taken away from us. We were not able to see the people that we love and care about on a regular basis. And then we had an added anxiety of a pandemic to deal with. All of that stress that you experience, your child or your children experience on some level. So it's important to pay attention to your own stress and your own coping strategies as well. So the last 15 months or so have been very challenging, but it's not all doom and gloom, because there's things that we can do to help support children to deal with all the transitions that are happening in our society. 4 strategies that I encourage you to try as we move back into interacting, as we prepare to go back to school, etc. Preparation is very, very key, especially when you are introducing your child to a new activity. You want to paint the picture of what an activity might look like before you arrive. So let's use the example of a playground. You might say, we're going to a new playground today. It's much bigger than the one we usually go to, so you're probably going to feel really excited and overwhelmed when we first get there. I want you to make sure that I'm within sight the whole time. So when you're playing, keep looking back and make sure that mommy is in sight. The other thing is there might be a lot of people there, and we're not used to being around people right now. So if that feels overwhelming, you can come over and take a little break, okay? You can sit with me on the bench. Maybe we'll take a couple deep breaths, and then you can go back to playing. Second bullet point, give clear expectations and check for clarity. So using the same example, when we go to the playground, you may not touch any of the other kids who are there. So I don't want to see pushing, shoving, kicking, biting, or hitting. If I see any of this, we're getting in the car and we're leaving the playground. If you get frustrated, I want you to come over to me and we'll calm down before you go back to playing. And then checking for clarity is simply saying, what did you hear me say? And reviewing whether they got the message or not. Third bullet point, give warnings when a preferred activity is ending. Pretty self-explanatory, but it is very difficult for a child to transition like that. They generally need some time. So give a 5-minute warning, give a 3-minute warning, give a 1-minute warning. If you have a child who doesn't quite understand time yet, then you can make it concrete. You can say, okay, you can go down the slide 5 more times, but then we really have to get in the car and leave. And then finally, using visual and sound cues for transition. So if you've ever heard a teacher sing the cleanup song, this is an example of that. The cleanup song is a musical cue for transition. So when children hear it, they know what to expect. And eventually, it becomes a smoother transition because they expect it and they get to do something fun and musical while they're engaging in the transition. The visual cues are very similar to what Zoe talked about in the beginning of this presentation, where you give a schedule so a child can look and see what the day will actually look like. This is a tool that will work for certain kids and won't work for other kids. So it's really simply about knowing your child and knowing what works for them. And if you don't know, I think you should feel free to experiment. So those are some ways that you can help children cope with transitions. It's really about coping. come back out and go into kindergarten readiness. So we're coming in to the finish line now. We're going to bring it all back to why we're here, which is to help prepare children and parents for kindergarten. So the most crucial skills that will prepare your child for kindergarten really are the social emotional ones. This is a graphic that we call High Five for Kindergarten Readiness. And if we zoom in a little bit, we can see that on the thumb, there is a category called social, emotional, and self-regulation. To get a little more specific, this category is about how a child manages themselves, their feelings, and their interactions with others. Some examples of social emotional skills are the ability to share, to take turns, to play alone or with other children, to ask for help, and to recognize emotions in self and others. Some ways that we can help children do this. So much of it is about parenting with intention. Be intentional about your interactions with your child. What are you trying to communicate? What are you trying to teach? And what is the best way to teach that skill for this particular child? If you have more than one child, you know that children can vary widely, even in the same family. So a strategy that you might use with one child really might not work with the other. Be present. So many times we're rushing through the day, trying to get everything done. We forget to have these present moments with children. There have to be moments in the day where you connect and you're present in how they feel, and you can really consider what's going on for them. This might be most important when you make a mistake. To give an example from the classroom, a teacher may get frustrated and raise their voice and yell at the children when they're acting out in some way. But she can also follow up on that and say, you know what? I really was not in control of my emotions in that moment. I got too frustrated and I raised my voice at you, and I really wish I hadn't done that. Next time, I'm going to take a little break before I talk to you about what my expectations are. In that example, the teacher is not only taking accountability for her behavior, but she's modeling the way that we communicate when we've made a mistake. And that modeling is really important for young children. Don't forget to play. Play is learning. Play is a wonderful way to underscore all of the skills that we've talked about here today. There's so much experimentation that can happen with play. And when it comes to social emotional skills, it can be a low stakes way to practice being mad or being overly excited. It's a way it can give children a way to practice coping strategies and to think of different scenarios of how they might process the world around them. And then finally, read books. This may seem a little bit disconnected, but many children's books deal with social emotional elements. And a child really can engage their imagination in a different way when they're reading. They can gain language for their experience and for the feelings they experience. And books can really generate conversation about some very important things that you might want to talk to your children about. So we've come to the end of Big Feelings, Little Feelings, and Kindergarten Readiness. On behalf of the entire Action for Early Learning outreach team, I want to thank you for your time and attention. And I hope you've come away with some valuable strategies for enhancing the social emotional wellness of your child and your family. We would love to hear from you. If you want to get in touch, again, this email is actionece@pec-cares.org. Thank you. Bye.